The forging of a rebel. Virginia Hall was not forged in the crucible of war, but in the frustrations of a world that consistently underestimated her. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1906 to a family of means, she was imbued with a fiercely independent spirit and a formidable intellect. Fluent in French, German, and Italian, she eschewed the conventional path of marriage and society, aspiring instead to join the U.S. Foreign Service, a bastion of male exclusivity. Her ambition took her to consular posts across Europe in the 1920s and 30s, but her gender barred her from taking the diplomatic examinations required for advancement. Then, in 1933, fate dealt a cruel blow. During a hunting trip in Turkey, she stumbled, accidentally discharging her shotgun into her left foot. The wound turned gangrenous, leading to the amputation of her leg below the knee. Her career hopes were shattered. A State Department regulation explicitly prohibited amputees from diplomatic service. It was a rejection that would instill in her a lifelong disdain for bureaucratic intransigence and a burning desire to prove her worth on her own terms. When war erupted in Europe in 1939, Hall, then in her early 30s, found her calling not in diplomacy, but in defiance. She quit her clerical job at the U.S. Embassy in Tallinn, Estonia, and made her way to France, where she volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French army. There, amid the chaos and collapse of the French front in the spring of 1940, she witnessed firsthand the brutal efficiency of the German blitzkrieg and the despair of a nation defeated. Fleeing to England via Spain as France fell, her resolve hardened. She would not be a bystander. In London, her fluency in French and her steely determination brought her to the attention of a fledgling, clandestine organization whose motto was, and now set Europe ablaze, the Special Operations Executive, SOE. Want to know more than what's in the textbooks? Subscribe to World War II, Unfiltered, and join our community of history explorers. Your likes and comments help the channel grow. An unlikely recruit, a daring infiltration. In the early days of 1941, the SOE was a desperate improvisation, a direct response to Winston Churchill's call for a ministry of ungentlemanly warfare. Its purpose was sabotage, subversion, and guerrilla warfare, and it sought recruits of a particular caliber, individuals who were resourceful, multilingual, and possessed an almost reckless bravery. Virginia Hall, despite her prosthetic leg, fit the profile perfectly. Her interviewer, a woman named Vera Atkins who would become a legend in F-Section, France, saw past the physical limitation. She recognized a core of unyielding grit. The SOE's training was notoriously punishing, covering everything from paramilitary skills and silent killing to cryptography, explosives, and the art of maintaining a cover story. For Hall, the physical aspects were an immense challenge. Long marches and parachute training were agonizing, but she refused to quit, adapting her techniques and driving herself harder than any of her male counterparts. Her trainers noted her exceptional intelligence, her cool head under pressure, and her ability to inspire confidence. They decided to send her in. On August 23, 1941, Virginia Hall, codenamed Marie, arrived in Vichy France, becoming the first female SOE agent to be deployed for an extended mission in the country. She didn't parachute in, a concession to her leg, but arrived by boat. Her cover was that of a journalist for the New York Post, a plausible reason for an American to be asking questions and traveling. Her mission was dangerously broad, to act as a pioneer, to assess the landscape for resistance, make contacts, and lay the groundwork for future SOE networks. She was a scout in a hostile wilderness, armed with little more than her wits, a small amount of cash, and a will of iron. Her base of operations was Lyon, the heart of the unoccupied zone, but a city swarming with Vichy police, German informers, and the ever-watchful WWII, Germany's military intelligence. For the limping lady, the war had truly begun. Weaving the web in Lyon. Arriving in Lyon, Virginia Hall, under the guise of Marie Monin, began the delicate and deadly business of building a network from scratch. Her journalistic cover gave her a pretext to travel and meet a wide range of people, from government officials to black marketeers. She was a master of judging character, quickly identifying those who harbored a secret hatred for the occupiers and the Vichy regime. Her first major success was connecting with Germaine Guerin, a wealthy and well-connected brothel madam in Lyon. Diane's network of contacts, safe houses, and underworld connections proved invaluable. Through her, Hall gained access to a clandestine world of smugglers, forgers, and malcontents who were eager to strike back at the Germans. Hall's apartment on the Place Ollier became the unofficial nerve center for SOE's nascent heckler circuit. She was more than just a contact, she was a logistician, a banker, and a strategist. She found letterboxes, secret drop points for messages, established safe houses for agents in transit, and managed the circuit's finances, laundering SOE funds through intricate local transactions. Her greatest talent was in organizing the most critical and dangerous part of the operation, the parachute drops. She scouted remote fields, recruited farmers to act as reception committees, and coordinated via coded BBC radio messages, phrases like "Le Merlin est frit," "the whiting is fried," to signal incoming supply planes from England. On moonless nights, she would be out in the cold, damp fields, flashing the prearranged signal with a torch as the Halifax bombers roared overhead, dropping canisters filled with weapons, explosives, and money. It was a lifeline for the fledgling resistance, and Virginia Hall was the one holding it. The betrayal of Cart and the rise of Heckler. The world of the resistance was rife with internal rivalries and the constant threat of betrayal. Hall's first major entanglement was with André Girard, the charismatic but erratic leader of Cart, one of the largest early resistance movements in the south of France. The SOE, and Hall by extension, invested heavily in Cart, believing Girard commanded a secret army of thousands ready to rise up. Hall, however, was deeply skeptical. Her on-the-ground analysis, meticulously reported back to London, warned that Girard was boastful, disorganized, and dangerously insecure. She noted his amateurish security protocols and his tendency to keep detailed lists of members, a catastrophic liability. Her warnings were initially dismissed by London, who were seduced by Girard's grand promises. But Hall was proven devastatingly correct. In November 1942, when the Germans invaded the unoccupied zone in response to the Allied landings in North Africa, Operation Torch, the Gestapo swiftly rolled up the Cart network, using Girard's own lists to arrest hundreds of members. The network collapsed overnight. This disaster vindicated Hall's judgment and solidified her status in London as a shrewd and reliable analyst. In the chaotic aftermath, with the Gestapo now fully in control of Lyon, Hall's own Heckler network became one of the few viable SOE assets left in the region. She worked with grim determination to pick up the pieces, sheltering fleeing Cart members and re-establishing broken lines of communication. It was during this period that her reputation began to grow, not just with the SOE, but with her enemies. The Gestapo, sifting through the wreckage of Cart, began to hear whispers of a mysterious and highly effective female agent, an American woman with a limp. The butcher of Lyon's obsession. With the German occupation of all of France in November 1942, the rules of the game changed irrevocably. The relative safety of the Vichy zone vanished. In its place came the full, brutal apparatus of the Nazi security state, personified in Lyon by one of the most infamous figures of the war, SS Obersturmführer Klaus Barbie. As the head of the Gestapo in Lyon, Barbie was intelligent, sadistic, and ruthlessly efficient. His methods were torture, execution, and infiltration. He quickly turned Lyon into a city of fear, dismantling resistance networks one by one. Yet, one figure remained maddeningly elusive, the agent his files referred to as the lady who limps. Barbie's spies and captured resistance could only provide fragments. She was tall, spoke French with an American accent, and was the mastermind behind parachute drops and escape lines. He knew she was the linchpin, the central hub connecting disparate groups. The lack of a name or a clear photograph drove him to distraction. He issued a specific command to all his agents: she is the most dangerous of all Allied agents. We must find and destroy her. Posters went up offering a reward for information about her. Barbie's obsession elevated Hall from a simple agent to a symbol of resistance defiance. Her codename inside the Gestapo became Artemis. For Hall, the pressure was immense. Every knock on the door, every passing patrol, could be the end. She was forced to change her appearance constantly, dyeing her hair, altering her clothes, and even changing the cadence of her limp. She relied on a small, utterly loyal circle, including a priest, Abbé Robert Aleche, who provided her with shelter. Unbeknownst to her, however, Aleche was a double agent, secretly reporting to Barbie. The net, woven by the butcher of Lyon himself, was tightening around her with terrifying speed. A treacherous sanctuary and a daring escape. By the spring of 1943, the Gestapo's grip on Lyon was suffocating. Klaus Barbie's double agent, Abbé Robert Aleche, had successfully infiltrated the highest levels of Hall's network. While she trusted him, her innate caution and years of tradecraft kept her from revealing all her secrets. She compartmentalized her operations, a practice that would soon save the wider resistance movement, if not her immediate circle. The blow fell in July 1943. Acting on Aleche's intelligence, Barbie's Gestapo squad swept through Lyon, arresting dozens of key figures in Hall's network, including her close collaborator, Dr. Jean Rousset. Her most trusted radio operator was caught mid-transmission, and her primary safe houses were compromised. Hall herself narrowly escaped capture, alerted by a prearranged danger signal, a chalk mark on a specific wall, left by a loyal lookout. She was now completely exposed, her cover blown, and her face known to the enemy. London sent an urgent, terse message, "Get out." But escaping occupied France was now infinitely more difficult than entering it. With Barbie's patrols hunting for the limping lady, every checkpoint was a potential death trap. Her only viable route was south, over the snow-choked Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain, a brutal, physically demanding journey for any able-bodied person, let alone a woman with a heavy, cumbersome prosthetic. Cuthbert, her prosthetic leg, had become a liability of the highest order. It was cumbersome, painful on long walks, and a dead giveaway if she were ever subjected to a search. But there was no other choice. It was the mountains or the Gestapo. In November 1943, with winter setting in, Virginia Hall began her perilous trek toward the Spanish border. The agony of the Pyrenees. The journey over the Pyrenees in the winter of 1943 was an ordeal that tested the very limits of human endurance. Accompanied by a local guide and 2 other resistance fighters, Hall faced treacherous terrain, deep snow, and freezing temperatures. For her, the challenge was magnified tenfold by Cuthbert. The prosthetic, not designed for alpine trekking, chafed her stump raw, causing excruciating pain with every step. At one point, the agony became so unbearable that she sent a desperate radio message to her SOE handlers in London, asking if they had any advice for dealing with the chafing and the risk of frostbite on her stump. The reply she received, from an officer who was clearly unaware of her specific physical condition, was famously and bleakly unhelpful: "If Cuthbert is giving you trouble, have him eliminated." The bitter irony was not lost on her. There, on a freezing mountainside, hunted by the Gestapo, she contemplated the absurdity of a desk-bound officer advising her to dispose of her own leg. She could not eliminate Cuthbert; she had to drag its dead weight, and herself, over the peaks. The cold was a constant enemy, seeping into her bones. Her guide feared she wouldn't make it, but her sheer force of will pushed her forward. After days of relentless, agonizing hiking, they finally crossed the frontier into Spain. But her ordeal was not over. Exhausted and frostbitten, she was almost immediately arrested by Spanish authorities for illegal entry. The neutrality of Franco's Spain was a complex and often pro-Axis affair. Virginia Hall, one of the Allies' most valuable agents, was thrown into a Spanish prison, her fate uncertain. From prison to London, and a new beginning. Imprisonment in Spain was a galling postscript to her heroic escape. Hall languished in Figueras prison, her health deteriorating. The U.S. consulate, officially neutral and wary of diplomatic incidents, was slow to act. Frustrated in realizing her identity as an SOE agent was too sensitive to reveal through official channels, Hall used her own ingenuity. She managed to smuggle a letter to the American consul, subtly hinting at her importance without compromising security. The message eventually worked its way up the diplomatic chain. The U.S. Embassy, likely prodded by discreet inquiries from British intelligence, finally intervened, securing her release after 6 agonizing weeks. She made her way to London in early 1944. There, she was received as a hero within the SOE. She was awarded the Order of the British Empire, OBE, a significant honor, though the ceremony was kept secret. Despite her incredible successes, the SOE deemed her too compromised to return to France. The Gestapo knew her description. Her limp was an unforgettable signature. It was, they concluded, too dangerous. This was precisely the kind of bureaucratic caution Hall despised. She had not endured Lyon and the Pyrenees only to be relegated to a desk job. If the British would not send her back, she would find someone who would. She turned to the Americans and their newly formed, aggressive intelligence agency, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner to the CIA. The OSS was eager to deploy experienced agents for the upcoming invasion of Europe. They listened to her plan, not as a liability, but as a seasoned veteran. They agreed to send her back. This time, she would not be a pioneer, she would be a commander. The return of Diane. In March 1944, just months before D-Day, Virginia Hall, now an agent of the American OSS, returned to occupied France. This time there would be no gentle arrival by boat. Fully aware of the risks, she insisted on being treated like any other field agent. She parachuted in from a British bomber, a feat of extraordinary courage and difficulty given her prosthetic leg. Upon landing, she hit the ground hard, but she was back in the fight. Her new codename was Diane, and her mission was even more ambitious than before. Disguised as a peasant milkmaid in the Haute-Loire, a rugged, rural department of central France, she set about her work with renewed fervor. She had learned from her time in Lyon. She was more cautious, her methods more refined. She found an unlikely but effective disguise, taking on the persona of an elderly farmhand. She dyed her hair gray, had her teeth ground down to resemble those of a peasant woman, and adopted a hunched, shuffling walk that helped disguise her distinctive limp. She became one of the locals, herding goats and selling cheese in the village market, all while secretly organizing one of the most effective resistance circuits in the region. Her objective was clear: to arm, train, and coordinate the local Maquis, rural guerrilla fighters, to conduct sabotage and harassment operations in support of the coming Allied invasion. She was no longer just a facilitator, she was a field commander, directing a secret army in waiting. Arming the Maquis of the Haute-Loire. As Diane, Hall's primary task was transforming scattered bands of poorly equipped partisans into a cohesive fighting force. The Haute-Loire was a hotbed of resistance activity, but the Maquisards lacked weapons, explosives, and, most importantly, professional coordination. Hall became their lifeline. Drawing on her SOE experience, she established a new, highly secure system for receiving parachute drops. She recruited three-man teams of young, fearless Frenchmen, whom she nicknamed her pets, to serve as her lieutenants and bodyguards. One of them, Edmond Libret, would become her closest confidant and, after the war, her husband. Together, they scouted drop zones in the remote, mountainous terrain. Communicating with London via her clandestine radio set, she coordinated a massive influx of war material. The BBC's coded messages would once again echo through the French night: "The sky is black, but the eagle is watching." Crates of Sten guns, Bren light machine guns, plastic explosives, and ammunition rained down from the sky. Hall herself was often on site, overseeing the reception committees as they frantically gathered the canisters and hid them in secret caches before German patrols could arrive. She didn't just supply the weapons, she instructed the Maquis in their use, teaching them the fine art of ungentlemanly warfare, how to derail trains, blow up bridges, and ambush German convoys. Her authority was absolute, earned not through rank but through her competence, her calm under fire, and her unwavering commitment to their shared cause. The old peasant woman herding goats was secretly forging a guerrilla army. D-Day and the unleashing of the secret army. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the coded message came crackling over the BBC: "Le corbeau chantera trois fois," the crow will sing 3 times. This was the general signal for all resistance circuits across France to begin their pre-planned, nationwide campaign of sabotage to support the Normandy landings. For Virginia Hall, Diane, and her Maquis forces in the Haute-Loire and surrounding areas, this was the moment they had been preparing for. Her mission, designated by the OSS, was to disrupt German troop movements, sever communication lines, and generally create as much chaos as possible behind the lines, preventing reinforcements from reaching the Normandy beachhead. Immediately, her carefully trained teams fanned out across the region. The results were swift and devastating. Railway lines connecting southern France to the north were systematically cut. Key bridges were destroyed with precisely placed explosive charges, forcing German convoys onto winding secondary roads where they were vulnerable to ambush. Telephone and telegraph wires were severed, isolating German garrisons and plunging their command structure into confusion. Hall acted as the central command and control node for these operations. From her hidden command post, equipped with her radio set, she received intelligence reports from her teams in the field, synthesized the information, and issued new orders based on the evolving tactical situation. Her reports, transmitted back to OSS headquarters in London, provided the Allies with invaluable real-time intelligence on German dispositions and reactions far from the main front. One of her most significant targets was the vital railway line running through the Rhone Valley, a primary artery for German reinforcements and supplies. Hall's Maquisards, armed with the weapons she had supplied, conducted dozens of attacks, derailing troop trains and supply convoys with such frequency that German engineers could barely repair one section before another was blown. She had turned her corner of France into a hornet's nest for the Wehrmacht. Leading from the shadows, the battle for the Montmouche. While Hall's primary role was coordination, she was drawn into directing larger-scale guerrilla actions. In May and June 1944, thousands of Maquisards from the Auvergne region, emboldened by the impending invasion, gathered on the high plateau of Montmouche to form a large, semi-conventional fighting force. It was a strategic gamble, concentrating their forces in one area. The Germans, alarmed by this growing threat to their rear, responded with overwhelming force, launching a major operation involving over 10,000 Wehrmacht troops backed by artillery and air support. Hall's own forces in the Haute-Loire were instrumental in supporting the Maquisards at Montmouche. Though not physically present at the main battle, she directed her units to conduct furious diversionary attacks on the German flanks and supply lines. Her teams ambushed German columns heading toward the plateau, blew up roads to slow their advance, and fed intelligence on German movements to the Maquis command. The Battle of Montmouche was brutal and ultimately a tactical defeat for the outgunned resistance fighters, who were forced to disperse after heavy fighting. However, it was a strategic victory. The battle tied down significant German forces for several critical weeks, preventing them from moving north to counter the Normandy invasion. Hall's analysis, sent back to London, was characteristically clear-eyed. She recognized the folly of the Maquis attempting to fight a conventional battle but praised their courage and highlighted the strategic value of their sacrifice. Her ability to see both the tactical reality and the larger strategic picture was a hallmark of her operational genius. She helped many of the scattered Montmouche survivors regroup, rearming them and integrating them into her more effective, hit-and-run guerrilla campaign. The technology of clandestine warfare. Virginia Hall's effectiveness was not solely down to her courage, it was also a function of her mastery of the technology of espionage. Her most vital piece of equipment was her suitcase radio transceiver, the Jedburgh Jet Set. This compact but powerful device was her link to London, her lifeline for requesting supplies and transmitting intelligence. Operating it was a deadly cat-and-mouse game. German direction-finding, D/F, teams were constantly on the prowl, using truck-mounted antennas to triangulate the source of clandestine transmissions. A radio operator who stayed on the air for more than a few minutes was effectively signing their own death warrant. Hall was acutely aware of this. She enforced rigid transmission discipline, keeping messages short and coded. She constantly moved her operating location, never transmitting from the same place twice if she could help it. Her operators would set up in a remote barn, a secluded attic, or a dense forest, transmit their vital burst of information, and then immediately pack up and disappear. The codes themselves were another layer of security. Based on one-time pads, pages of random keys shared only between her and London, they were mathematically unbreakable. A typical code might involve a poem where each letter was assigned a number, which was then added to the numbers from the one-time pad, making the resulting string of digits meaningless to anyone without the exact same pad and poem. Hall also became an expert in the tools of sabotage. She taught her maquisards how to use pressure cookers, small, ingenious time delay fuses developed by the SOE that could be set for hours or even days, allowing saboteurs to be miles away when a charge detonated. She understood the technical specifications of plastic explosives, knowing precisely how much was needed to sever a steel rail versus how much was needed to drop a concrete bridge support. This fusion of tactical acumen and technical expertise made her an exceptionally effective force multiplier. The liberation of Limping. As the Allied armies broke out from Normandy and raced across France in August 1944, the German position in the south began to crumble. Operation Dragoon, the Allied landing on the French Riviera on August 15, sealed their fate. The German 19th Army was ordered to retreat north up the Rhone Valley, directly through the territory controlled by Hall's partisans. This was the moment Hall and her secret army had been waiting for. They would not wait for the Allied regular armies to liberate them, they would do it themselves. Hall coordinated a general uprising across the region. Her 3 battalions of Maquis, now well-armed and battle-hardened, descended from the mountains. They systematically liberated towns and villages, disarming or eliminating isolated German garrisons. Their primary objective was Lyon, the capital of the Haute-Loire department. Rather than a frontal assault, Hall orchestrated a campaign of encirclement and harassment. Her forces blew the remaining bridges, blocked all major roads, and ambushed any German units attempting to enter or leave the city. Inside Lyon, German morale plummeted. Cut off, short on supplies, and assailed by an invisible enemy, the German commander saw the hopelessness of his situation. On August 25, 1944, the same day Paris was liberated, the German garrison in Lyon surrendered to the French Forces of the Interior, FFI, the official banner of the United Resistance. Virginia Hall, the unassuming peasant woman, had orchestrated the capture of a major regional capital, taking hundreds of German prisoners without the involvement of a single Allied regular soldier. It was a stunning testament to the power of organized popular resistance, and to her leadership. An unsung victory and a quiet departure. In the chaotic days following the liberation of the region, Virginia Hall finally came out of the shadows. The maquisards she had armed and led were stunned to discover that the mastermind Diane was not a French general or a British colonel, but the quiet, middle-aged woman they had seen tending goats. Her authority had been so complete that her identity was secondary to her results. Yet, her moment of triumph was tinged with the familiar frustration of being overlooked by the official military hierarchy. When the first American uniformed troops finally arrived in the area, their commander was dismissive of the resistance's achievements and patronizing toward Hall herself, unable to comprehend that a civilian woman could have directed such a successful military campaign. She filed her final reports to the OSS, meticulously detailing the tons of explosives used, the number of bridges destroyed, the length of railway track cut, and the count of enemy soldiers killed or captured. Her Diane network was credited with derailing 8 trains, destroying 4 bridges, and killing over 150 German soldiers while capturing 500 more, all at the cost of minimal casualties to her own forces. Her work done, she quietly departed. There were no victory parades for the spy from Baltimore. Her war was won in secret, and her victory remained there. She made her way to Paris and then back to the OSS headquarters. For her extraordinary heroism, she would be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only one given to a civilian woman in World War II. But the ceremony, once again, would be held in private. Virginia Hall did not seek accolades, she sought to serve, and she had done so with a brilliance and bravery that few could match. The Distinguished Service Cross. Upon her return to OSS headquarters, Virginia Hall's achievements were, within the secret corridors of intelligence, the stuff of legend. Her final report from the field was a masterclass in concise, factual understatement, detailing a campaign of sabotage and guerrilla warfare that had far exceeded the expectations of her superiors. She had not only survived but had thrived, leading French partisans in open combat and liberating a significant portion of French territory through her own command. The head of the OSS, General William Wild Bill Donovan, was a fervent admirer of bold, unconventional action. He recognized that Hall's contribution was extraordinary, far beyond that of a typical agent. He personally recommended her for the Distinguished Service Cross, DSC, the United States Army's second highest award for valor, second only to the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was approved, a landmark decision. The DSC was a combat award, almost exclusively given to soldiers for acts of extreme heroism under fire. For it to be awarded to a civilian, and a woman, was virtually unprecedented. However, Virginia Hall's defining characteristic remained her aversion to publicity and her commitment to the clandestine nature of her work. When it came time for the award ceremony, she respectfully declined a public presentation by President Harry S. Truman. She insisted that she was still operational and most anxious to get on with the work, and that any public recognition would blow her cover and render her useless as a field agent. Her request was honored. In a quiet, private ceremony at his office, General Donovan pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on the woman who had been Marie, Diane, and the Limping Lady. The citation praised her for establishing and arming the resistance in the Haute-Loire, citing her complete disregard for her own safety and her absolute courage, which served as an inspiration to the resistance groups she led. Aftermath of war and a new foe. With the war in Europe over, Virginia Hall's operational career came to an end. The OSS was quickly disbanded in September 1945, and its personnel were scattered. Hall, along with many other OSS veterans, transitioned to its successor organization, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, which was established in 1947. She married Edmond Libret, the loyal young French lieutenant who had served as her second-in-command in the Haute-Loire. They settled on a farm in Maryland, a quiet life that stood in stark contrast to the perils she had faced in France. However, her service to her country was not over. At the CIA, she became an analyst, tasked with parsing intelligence related to French and European political matters. Yet, the same bureaucratic wall she had railed against in her youth reappeared. At the CIA, she was once again a woman in a man's world. Field operations were now seen as a young man's game, and despite her unparalleled experience, she was consistently passed over for senior positions and overseas postings. Her colleagues, many of whom were Ivy League men with no field experience, often treated her as a relic rather than the legendary operative she was. She was assigned to a desk, her vast knowledge of tradecraft and human intelligence largely confined to writing reports. The institutional sexism that had barred her from the Foreign Service before the war now limited her advancement within the agency she had helped to found. Her greatest enemy was no longer the Gestapo, but the stultifying, promotions-driven culture of a peacetime bureaucracy. It was a source of deep and lasting frustration for a woman accustomed to action and autonomy. The unseen legacy. Virginia Hall retired from the CIA in 1966, having reached the mandatory retirement age of 60. She and her husband lived out their days quietly on their farm in Barnesville, Maryland. She rarely spoke of her wartime experiences. To her neighbors, she was a quiet, private woman who walked with a limp. Few, if any, knew that she had been hunted by Klaus Barbie, commanded a secret army, and held the Distinguished Service Cross. Her story, like so many records of the SOE and OSS, remained classified for decades. Her contributions were known only to a small circle of intelligence professionals. However, as files were declassified in the 1980s and beyond, historians began to piece together the astonishing scope of her achievements. The British government officially acknowledged her work, and she was posthumously honored in France, where a school was named after her. In 2016, the CIA named a training facility the Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center in her honor. Her legacy is profound and multifaceted. She was a pioneer for women in intelligence and special operations, proving that courage and competence were not gender-specific. Her work in France directly saved Allied lives and shortened the war by tying down thousands of German troops. More than that, she provided a blueprint for the modern intelligence operative, one who can blend in, build networks from scratch, leverage local assets, and combine intelligence gathering with direct action. Her story became a case study within the intelligence community on how a single, determined individual, even one with a perceived disability, can have a strategic impact on the outcome of a conflict. The Butcher's Fate. While Virginia Hall lived a life of quiet obscurity, the fate of her chief antagonist, Klaus Barbie, took a different and more public turn. After the war, Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, was recruited by the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. In a cynical Cold War trade-off, American intelligence valued his anti-communist expertise and his network of informants more than they valued justice for his war crimes. Protected by the United States, he was employed to spy on the French and then smuggled out of Europe to Bolivia in 1951 via a rattling organized by U.S. intelligence. He lived for decades in Bolivia under the alias Klaus Altman, working as a businessman and a security advisor to the country's dictators. However, the Nazi hunters Serge and Beat Klausfeld tracked him down in the early 1970s. After years of legal and diplomatic wrangling, he was finally extradited to France in 1983 to stand trial. In 1987, Klaus Barbie was tried in Lyon, the very city he had terrorized. Survivors of his torture chambers testified against him. He was convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to life in prison. He died of cancer in a French prison in 1991. The man who had obsessively hunted the Limping lady and murdered so many of her comrades ultimately faced a measure of the justice that she and the resistance had fought for. The Ghost of the Hautbois. Virginia Hall passed away in 1982 at the age of 76 and was buried in a simple grave in a local cemetery near her Maryland farm. There was no military fanfare, no public acknowledgement of the passing of a great American hero. Her tombstone bears no mention of her wartime service. She remains, in death as in life, a clandestine figure. Her story is not one of battlefield glory in the traditional sense. It is a story of quiet, persistent, and incredibly effective courage. She fought her war in whispers, in moonlit fields, in coded messages, and in the leadership of others. She turned her limp, the very thing her own government saw as a disqualifying weakness, into an unforgettable part of her legend, a legend that terrified her enemies. From the drawing rooms of Baltimore to the torture chambers of Lyon, and from the frozen peaks of the Pyrenees to the liberated streets of WWII, Virginia Hall's journey is a powerful testament to the idea that the most effective weapons in any war are an indomitable will and a brilliant mind. She was the ghost of the Hautbois, the Limping lady, and one of the greatest unsung heroes of the Second World War.